For a moment, neither of us said anything. The candles flickered on the table between us, and the soft music still played in the background like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Daniel cleared his throat and forced a small laugh. "It's just a coworker," he said quickly. "Someone from the office being stupid." I stared at him, trying to process what I had just read. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I had known Daniel for 12 years. I knew the way he spoke when he was relaxed, when he was excited, and when he was lying. And right then, he was lying. "A coworker calls you baby?" I asked quietly. His face stiffened for a split second before he looked down at his plate. "Rachel, you're overthinking it." Overthinking. The word echoed in my head while I sat there staring at the man who had shared my home, my bed, and my life for over a decade. I noticed something else then. Daniel had placed his phone face down on the table and slid it closer to himself. He never used to do that. In fact, he used to leave it anywhere without caring. Suddenly, small memories started connecting in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. The late nights at work. The sudden weekend meetings. The way he had started dressing nicer just to go to the office. At the time, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We had built our life together brick by brick. Trust was supposed to be the foundation. But now that foundation felt like it was cracking beneath my feet. Daniel tried to continue eating like the moment had passed, but I couldn't touch my food anymore. My appetite was gone. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed again. This time he grabbed it instantly. Too instantly. He stood up from the table. "I need to take this. It's work. Work." Without waiting for my response, he walked into the hallway and lowered his voice as he answered the call. I sat alone at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from me. And deep down, a terrible feeling settled into my heart. Something in my marriage was very, very wrong. I waited until Daniel came back to the table. He looked calmer than before, but something about his expression felt guarded. He picked up his fork again like nothing serious had happened. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Who is Lena?" I asked. The question hung in the air between us. Daniel didn't answer right away. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair. "I told you," he said. "She's someone from work." That message didn't sound like work. He sighed like he was already tired of the conversation. "Rachel, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Some people joke like that." I watched his face carefully. His tone sounded calm, but his eyes kept avoiding mine. "So she jokes about you leaving your wife?" I said quietly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the kitchen. "You know how offices are. People tease each other." The explanation made no sense, and I think he knew it. The room suddenly felt heavy. I could barely hear the music anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. For the first time that night, I really studied Daniel's face. He looked uncomfortable, like he just wanted the conversation to end. "Are you seeing someone else?" I asked. He looked at me quickly. "No. Of course not." The answer came too fast. I didn't argue anymore, but something inside me had already changed. I started thinking about the last few months and the things that once felt normal. Daniel had been coming home later than usual. At first it was once or twice a week. Then it became almost every night. He also started traveling more for business. Trips that used to happen once every few months suddenly became regular. There were other small things too. He had become distant. When we talked, his answers were short. Sometimes he looked distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. Back then I blamed stress from work. Now I wasn't so sure. Daniel stood up and carried his plate to the sink, ending the conversation without saying another word. I remained at the table, watching him walk away. A quiet voice inside me kept repeating the same thought. Something was seriously wrong, and Daniel wasn't telling me the truth. Over the next few days, I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started watching. Daniel seemed normal on the surface, but once I paid closer attention, small things stood out. He carried his phone with him everywhere. If he left the room, the phone went with him. Even when we were sitting on the couch together, he kept it close in his hand. Sometimes it would buzz, and he would check it quickly before turning the screen away from me. I pretended not to notice. A few times his phone rang in the evening, and he stepped outside to answer it. When he came back, he acted like everything was fine, but his voice sounded tight and forced. The more I observed, the more nervous he seemed. One evening Daniel came home from work later than usual. He said he was exhausted and went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. I stayed in the living room, trying to read, but my mind kept drifting. Then I heard a vibration on the coffee table. Daniel had left his phone there. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. My heart started beating faster. I knew I should ignore it, but the curiosity was stronger than my hesitation. The screen lit up again. A message appeared from the same name. Lena. My hands felt cold as I slowly picked up the phone. The message preview was already visible. Last night meant everything to me. I hate pretending we're just coworkers when we're around people. My stomach dropped. I kept staring at the words, hoping I had misunderstood them somehow. But the meaning was clear. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't harmless teasing. It was real. The water from the shower was still running down the hallway, and Daniel had no idea I was holding his phone. I placed it back on the table exactly where it had been and sat down slowly. My mind was racing. One message like that doesn't appear out of nowhere. It meant they had been spending time together. It meant there were conversations I had never seen. And it meant this relationship had been happening for much longer than I realized. For the first time, the truth felt unavoidable. My husband wasn't just hiding something. He was having an affair. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the message again and again. Every time I closed my eyes, the words came back to me. By morning, the shock had slowly turned into determination. I needed to know how deep this went. Guessing and imagining things would only make it worse. Later that day, Daniel left for work like usual. A few minutes after he walked out the door, I noticed he had forgotten his phone on the kitchen counter. My heart started beating faster again. I stared at the phone for a long moment before picking it up. The conversation with Lena was still there. I scrolled through a few messages and felt my stomach twist. They talked like people who had been close for a long time. Trying to stay calm, I typed a short reply from Daniel's phone. Can we meet later? Same cafe as last time. A few minutes passed before the response came. Of course. I'll be there at 5. I put the phone back exactly where Daniel had left it and spent the rest of the day feeling nervous and sick. Part of me wondered if I was making a mistake. But another part of me needed to face the truth directly. At 5 o'clock, I walked into the small cafe downtown. A young woman was already sitting near the window. She looked up as the door opened, and I knew immediately it was her. She looked around my age, maybe a little younger, with long brown hair and a hopeful expression. When she saw me walking toward her table instead of Daniel, her smile faded. Can I help you? She asked, confused. I sat down across from her. You must be Lena. Her eyes widened. Wait, who are you? My name is Rachel, I said quietly. Daniel's wife. The color drained from her face. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she looked down at the table, clearly shocked. I didn't know you were coming, she said slowly. What did Daniel tell you about me? I asked. She hesitated before answering. He said your marriage was basically over, she admitted. He told me he was planning to leave soon. Her words felt like a sharp knife twisting deeper into my chest. Because I knew one thing for sure. Daniel had never said a single word about leaving. After leaving the cafe, I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. Lena's words kept echoing in my mind. Daniel had told her our marriage was almost over. Meanwhile, at home, he acted like everything between us was normal. I needed to understand how long this had been happening. Over the next few days, I started looking more carefully at things around the house. Not in an obvious way, but quietly. I checked the stack of mail on the kitchen counter, the desk drawer in Daniel's office, and the folder where we kept our bank statements. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed a credit card statement that I didn't recognize. It wasn't one of the cards we normally use together. I opened the envelope slowly and began reading the charges. My stomach tightened almost immediately. There were payments to restaurants I had never been to with Daniel. Expensive dinners in parts of the city we rarely visited. There were also charges from hotels, small boutique hotels downtown. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest as the dates started to line up in my mind. Many of those nights were evenings when Daniel had told me he was working late. I kept reading. A few charges were from jewelry stores and clothing boutiques. They weren't places Daniel ever shopped for me. In fact, he rarely bought gifts at all unless it was a birthday or holiday. But here he was, spending money on things I had never seen. I checked older statements and found more of the same pattern. The charges went back months. Almost a full year. That realization hurt more than anything else. This wasn't a short mistake or a sudden decision. Daniel had been living two separate lives for a long time. Every normal evening we spent together, every quiet dinner, every casual conversation about our day, had been happening while he was hiding this secret. The betrayal felt deeper with each piece of evidence I found. What hurt most wasn't just that he had another woman. It was the fact that he had been lying to my face almost every day while pretending to be the same husband I trusted. A few days later, I decided it was time to stop pretending everything was normal. I had seen enough to know the truth. The only thing left was to hear Daniel say it himself. That evening, when he came home from work, I asked him to sit down in the living room. My voice was calm, but inside I felt completely drained. Daniel looked at me with a confused expression as he sat on the couch. "What's going on?" I placed a small stack of papers on the table in front of him. Credit card statements, printed receipts, and a few notes I had written about the dates. He glanced at them and then looked back at me. "What is this?" he asked. "You know exactly what it is," I replied quietly. For a moment he didn't touch the papers. Then he slowly picked them up and began reading. I watched his face carefully as the realization started to appear in his eyes. The room stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in the couch like the weight of everything had suddenly caught up with him. "So, you know," he said. "Yes," I answered. He rubbed his face with his hands, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered. I stared at him in disbelief. "Like what?" Daniel looked down at the floor. "I didn't plan it. It just happened over time." "So you've been lying for almost a year and that's your explanation?" He didn't answer right away. After a moment he spoke again, his voice quieter. "I do care about Lena," he admitted. "But I never meant to hurt you." The words sounded empty the moment they left his mouth. I waited for him to say something that might show real regret. Something that might prove our marriage meant something to him. But nothing came. Just excuses, vague explanations, and weak apologies that didn't change anything. As he continued talking, something unexpected happened inside me. The sadness that had been crushing me for days slowly disappeared. The tears stopped. In their place came a strange kind of clarity. For the first time since this nightmare began, my mind felt calm. And in that calm moment, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't the man I thought he was. After that conversation, I didn't argue anymore. I didn't yell or throw things. I simply stood up, collected the papers from the table, and went to the bedroom. Daniel seemed surprised by my reaction. I could tell he expected anger or tears. But I had already cried enough in private. There was nothing left to gain from emotional fights. Over the next few days, I acted calm around him. I spoke normally, cooked dinner, and followed our usual routine. Daniel looked relieved. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed when we talked. I think he believed the worst part had passed. What he didn't know was that my mind was working quietly behind the scenes. One morning after he left for work, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Walking into that office felt strange, but also necessary. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained the situation. She asked me questions about our finances, our house, and our shared accounts. By the end of the meeting, she gave me clear advice about what steps to take next. After that day, I began organizing everything. I gathered bank statements, property papers, and tax documents. I made copies of anything that showed our financial history. I also started keeping track of household expenses and account balances. Every piece of information went into a folder that I kept hidden in my closet. The process was slow, but it gave me a sense of control that I had been missing. Meanwhile, Daniel continued acting like things were slowly returning to normal. Sometimes he tried to be extra kind, offering to help around the house or suggesting we spend time together. I responded politely but kept my distance emotionally. Inside, my decision was already made. This marriage was over. But I wasn't going to rush into anything unprepared. I wanted to make sure I protected myself first. So while Daniel believed I was slowly forgiving him, I was quietly building the path toward my exit. For the first time in months, I felt focused. Not on the betrayal, but on the future I was about to create without him. A few weeks passed, and life inside the house looked peaceful on the surface. Daniel seemed more relaxed than he had been in months. One evening he told me he wanted to invite some family members and a few close friends over for dinner. He said it would be nice for everyone to get together again. I simply nodded and agreed. The dinner was planned for Saturday night. That afternoon I prepared the house like I normally would for guests. The table was set neatly, and the food was ready in the kitchen. Everything looked warm and welcoming. By the evening, people started arriving. Daniel's parents came first, followed by his sister and her husband. A couple of our longtime friends joined as well. Everyone was chatting, laughing, and enjoying the evening. Daniel moved around the room comfortably, pouring drinks and telling jokes. Watching him act so normal almost felt strange to me. Dinner went smoothly. People talked about work, travel, and everyday life. Anyone looking from the outside would think we were just a happy couple hosting a friendly gathering. But I knew the night wasn't going to end that way. After everyone finished eating, I stood up from my chair and walked to the living room table. I picked up a folder I had prepared earlier. Before everyone leaves, I said calmly, "There's something important I want to share." The room grew quiet. Daniel looked at me with confusion. I opened the folder and placed several printed pages on the table where everyone could see them. "These are messages and receipts," I explained. "They show that Daniel has been having an affair." For a moment no one moved. The silence felt heavy. Daniel's face immediately turned pale. "What are you doing?" he asked under his breath. I didn't raise my voice. I simply showed the evidence one by one: dates, hotel charges, and conversations. Daniel tried to interrupt, but the truth was already clear. His parents looked shocked. Our friend stared at the papers in disbelief. The comfortable image Daniel had built around himself began falling apart right there in the room. And for the first time since this began, everyone could finally see the truth. After that night, everything changed quickly. The truth had been spoken in front of the people Daniel cared about most, and there was no way to take it back. The next morning the house felt quiet and heavy. Daniel tried to talk to me, but I kept the conversation short. There was nothing left to discuss. Word of what happened at the dinner spread through the family. Daniel's parents were deeply disappointed. His sister called him several times, trying to understand why he had done something like that. Some of our friends stopped contacting him completely. The image Daniel had always tried to maintain, responsible husband, trustworthy man, had been broken. A few days later I received an unexpected call from Lena. Her voice sounded very different from the confident woman I met before. She seemed confused and upset. She told me she had confronted Daniel after hearing about the dinner. During that conversation she discovered he had not been honest with her either. He had made promises about the future that he never intended to keep. Many of the things he told her about his life were exaggerated or completely false. Listening to her, I realized something important. Daniel had been lying to both of us in different ways. After that call, I focused on moving forward. I contacted my lawyer again and officially started the divorce process. Because I had already prepared the documents and gathered the financial records, everything moved smoothly. The house, the savings, and other shared assets were handled through legal agreements that protected my stability. Daniel tried a few times to change my mind, but my decision was already final. Weeks later, when the paperwork was almost finished, I sat alone in the living room one evening. The house was quiet, but for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel painful. Instead, it felt peaceful. The anger and sadness that had filled my mind for so long were slowly fading away. In their place was a feeling I hadn't expected to experience so soon. Relief. For the first time since this began, I felt like I could finally breathe again. After the divorce was finalized, I finally had time to think about everything that had happened. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, I remembered the night it all began, the message from Lena on Daniel's phone during our anniversary dinner. That single moment had changed my life completely. At first, I felt broken. I questioned everything I had believed about my marriage, about the man I loved, and even about myself. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I spent days replaying memories, wondering how I had missed the signs, and feeling the weight of months, maybe years, of lies. But over time, the pain began to teach me something I hadn't realized before. I understood that staying in a dishonest marriage would have only made me smaller, only made me lose myself. I decided that I wasn't going to let someone else define my worth. Instead of letting anger and sadness control me, I chose strength. I started rebuilding my life slowly but surely. I redecorated my apartment, took time to reconnect with friends I had neglected, and even began exploring hobbies I had always wanted to try. Each small step reminded me that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else. I also focused on my career. I enrolled in a few professional courses and took on projects that challenged me. With each success, no matter how small, I felt my confidence grow. The betrayal had hurt me, yes, but it had also forced me to see my own power and independence. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. To listen to my instincts, to set boundaries, and to never ignore the signs when something feels wrong. That lesson was hard, but it was priceless. Looking back, I realized that betrayal doesn't always destroy you. Sometimes, it frees you. It forces you to confront the truth, make difficult decisions, and step into a life that is truly yours. I'm not the same person I was before that dinner. I'm stronger, wiser, and more confident. And for the first time in a long time, I feel truly free. Free to live, free to love myself, and free to start over, with hope instead of fear guiding me forward.